The Planning and Zoning meeting for May 17, 2017 will now come to order. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have roll call, please?
Chairman Williams.
Here.
Vice Chairman Shavir.
Here.
Secretary Chambers.
Here.
Dr. Faison.
Yes.
Member Baker.
Here.
Member Ritchie.
Yep.
School Board Member Hare.
Here.
Next is approval of minutes for April 19, 2017. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All persons who anticipate speaking on any public item must first fill out the oath card to keep on the agenda item and sign the oath card contained thereon. These cards are located near the table at the entrance to the council chamber or may be obtained from the recording secretary. This meeting will be conducted in accordance to procedures adopted in Resolution 24-1997. Those speaking in favor of a request will be heard first, those opposed will be heard second, and those who wish to make a public comment on an item will speak third. The applicant may make a brief rebuttal if necessary. A representative from either side, for or against, may cross-examine a witness. Anyone who speaks is considered a witness. If you have photographs, sketches, or documents you desire the commission to consider, they must be submitted into evidence and will be retained by the city. Please submit such exhibits to the recording secretary. Staff, has the items been properly advertised, and has anybody on the commission talked to anybody about the items coming before us?
They have been properly advertised.
Okay. And with that, we'll go to the first item.
The first item before you tonight is a ordinance related to assisted living facilities in the Shoreline Mixed-Use Zoning District. Based upon a citizen's request on February 14th, 2017, Council provided advisability directing staff to come up with an ordinance to allow an assisted living facility inside the Shoreline Mixed-Use Zoning District. The attached ordinance amends the zoning use table to include ALFs as a limited use, or a use rather with limitations, within the SMU zoning district based upon the criteria currently in place for the R2, R3, which are multifamily zoning districts, the HM, which is the hospital medical zoning district, and a downtown mixed-use zoning district. Where the property is less than 1.5 acres and is located on a collector or arterial road, it would be permitted with limitations. Where these conditions are not met, an ALF may be considered as a conditional use only. With that, on the next page, on page 7 of your packet, is the beginning whereas clauses and title of the draft ordinance. And it starts on section 1. I'm just going to briefly go over the ordinance for you. Section 1, if you remember, this is our new zoning use table, and that it starts on page 8 of your packet, and that's the first page of that table. And so what we're doing under the category residential, and if you have any questions, please stop me if you're not following me. There's a category there, or a permitted use there called assisted living facility. And if you scroll over or look over on that row all the way towards the right, you'll see under the column heading SMU for Shoreline Mixed Use Zoning, we are putting the letter L there. And what that L stands for is permitted, but with limitations. And then if you look further to the right, you'll see the section of the code, section number 28-72, where you can find those specific standards that you would have to abide by in order to allow an assisted living facility. So going down to page 13 of your packet, you'll see the beginning of those standards for an assisted living facility that's currently in the code. And what you see in strike through and underline are the changes that are being proposed in this ordinance. So again, on page 13 of your packet, you'll see that zoning use table. And under the category of SMU, Shoreline Mixed Use, we're putting that letter L, in addition to where a ALF is currently allowed right now. And as you can see in that table, they are currently allowed in the R2, R3 multifamily zoning districts, in the HM, Hospital Medical Zoning District, and some of the subdistricts of the downtown mixed-use zoning district. That's DMU. And then in the RMU, that's the regional mixed-use zoning district. And if you recall, that's the area where it's Antigua Bay, or formerly called Sandy Point development. Some of those subdistricts allow an ALF there as well. So going to the definition under subparagraph B, same page, 13, you'll see we've made some minor changes to the actual definition of an assisted living facility. The paragraph that's totally stricken through, that was not in the prior code, if you recall. That was something we had introduced in this new code. So you understand, that language there was introduced in this new code originally by staff and was approved by you and by the City Council with the adoption of the code update. And it included density language. And so basically just looked at a certain number of ALF beds equate to a unit or a number of units, residential units. So just to help us understand or be able to apply density calculations to ALFs. When we received the request from the citizen about allowing an ALF inside the SMU zoning district, we reviewed how this would impact ALFs in other parts of the city and how this would be, this density requirement would be applied in the SMU zoning district. We realized after some thorough review of this that providing a density requirement in here, as we originally proposed in our code update, was not going to work. What we propose to do now is to strike that out and not have a density calculation like we currently used to have in our old code. What we are proposing to do now is, you see further down on that same page, under subparagraph C1, permitted uses with limitations, instead of using a density calculation, we are requiring a conditional use permit, instead of based on a density threshold, rather the size of the property where the ALF is going to be located would be the threshold instead. So we've put in here, for example, in the R2 zoning district, originally we had proposed and had adopted in our code update a density threshold to require conditional use of 9 units per acre. And we are now proposing that striking that out, and instead replacing that with, if the property is less than 1.5 acres where the ALF was going to be proposed, it would not require a conditional use permit. And then above, go ahead. Let me see. No greater than 1.5 acres, excuse me. So 1.5 acres or less, it would not require a conditional use permit. It would just have to meet the conditions of an ALF. I'll stop and answer any questions you have if you want some clarity on this.
So if you're going by density, you're removing density calculations and you want to add in shoreline mixed use. Generally, we don't use submerged lands as calculations, but in this particular language, it means that you could utilize that into, because it's not density, it's overall, submerged lands could be included in this.
No, submerged lands can't be considered as part of that in that
In
case.
density, it can't.
Right.
But under the overall land, it seems like it would be able to, under the right that you have here.
That's a good question. I'd have to get back to you and give you an answer on that one. But I would suspect that we'd probably, there's so few properties that actually have submerged land.
But the only submerged lands that would be, I mean, there are some there, but on the river, but SMU would open that up, is what I'm getting at. So I think that if this was to be approved, I think it would be wise to address the submerged lands since you're dealing with SMU.
If the property has submerged lands, that would be mean it would probably hurt them more in the applicant, and they would have to go through a conditional use permit process in that instance.
True. But as we know, that it's very rare that conditional use permits are denied.
There are a lot of conditions in here that would have to meet, and depending, and as you're aware too, the conditional use there are additional conditions that could be applied onto a permit if warranted based on the circumstances.
Okay. Vice Chairman Shavir.
Let me back up just a little bit. 1.5 acres, is that minimum, or is that a minimum size?
No. That's the maximum size. If you're going to do an ALF in any of these zoning districts, you'd have to meet all the standards of an ALF, regardless of the size. The 1.5 acres is just a threshold as to whether you're required to go through a public hearing process or not. Can it be approved administratively as long as you meet all the conditions? Or does it have to go before you and the city council?
Just for the sake of clarity, okay, if it was 2.5 acres or 2 acres, what happens at that point? If it's larger than the 1.5 acres you're talking about?
It would be required to go through a conditional use process and would have to go through the public hearing process.
And the reasoning behind that? I'm a little bit, the reason I'm saying is, in my mind, 1.5 acres should be the minimum, and anything over above 1.5 acres would be okay. It's not relevant to the project as long as it has at least 1.5 acres. Most of the time, that's the way I perceive this type of project. So tell me if I'm looking at this incorrectly.
I think you're misunderstanding. Let me back up to the old code. So prior to April, when our new code became effective, we had in our old land development regulations an ALF that was proposed in the R2 or R3 or even the HM zoning districts were required to go through a conditional use permit regardless of the size, the density, or anything. They just required to go through that. And they all had to meet the same set of standards. So what the staff had proposed in the new code was, let's give some flexibility to those smaller ALFs that will still have to meet the same conditions, but as long as they meet all those standards and conditions that are placed in the code now, why would we want to make them go through the public hearing process if they're small, if they're not going to have a major impact? Now, those that would be large and have a major impact, we kept it as they wouldn't have to go through a public hearing process so that we can reevaluate it and you could evaluate for any impacts on the neighborhood. So we had to come up with a threshold for that between whether administrative approval or conditional use approval. And we came up with that density calculation, which I described just now on page 13 of your packet. And that was introduced and approved in the new code. But after review of this with the staff, after receiving the request from the citizen about allowing the ALF use inside of the Shoreline Mixed-Use Zoning District, we realized the density was going to be a problem. And so we decided that the best solution to that was to come up with an acreage size of the property as a threshold instead. So an ALF can be on a piece of property that is 1 acre in size, and that would be considered small. And they would have to meet all the standards of the ALF. And if they could do it, it could be approved administratively in this proposed ordinance.
And that would be a conditional use?
Correct. If it was more than 1.5 acres, we would consider that to be a large ALF and therefore would have to go through the public hearing process.
All right, let's do this real quick. Let's close this, open to the public, and then close it to the public. Then I have a few more questions. So in the past when we talked about this, we talked about that the state actually has the standards on this. And then really, I mean, we have some standards on here, but ultimately the state is the authority on items like this. When we talk about ALFs, I wanted to understand something. You know, I understand it's assisted living facility, but what does it really encompass? What does it, I mean, I also look at it as a couple things. It's group home, can be a group home. Typically we look at it as for elderly that needs additional help. But is there anything else that it can be used for? I mean, because under the definition, it's more, it looks like it's for hospital care, it could be mental care, could it be?
I could try and answer that. An ALF is required to get a state license I think, from ACA, which is the Administration or Agency for Healthcare Administration, excuse me. It is not considered a nursing home.
Right.
It's just, if you will, just underneath what a nursing home would be. So it's not a hospital setting. It's not intended to be a hospital, but it certainly could include residents that may need almost the same kind of care. But it's intended, from my understanding, to be more of a as much as independent living as possible. But obviously, there's going to be someone there to assist in any way.
Right.
And so there are various levels, as far as I understand. There could be very independent living
Right.
standards, or residents that are living independently, and some that probably need a significant amount of care.
So what comes to my mind and what I'm asking is, Member Baker, I think, is the one that brought up on our last meeting about you've seen, it might have been Member Ritchie as well, that you've seen homes where you'd never even noticed, a couple of people living there, right? And so that is one scenario where we just don't even recognize it. It's just a couple individuals. So I can understand where this could be classified underneath the 1.5 acres. But if we go farther and we say, okay, I have a 10-bed in that 1.5 acres, could I put a treatment facility there under ALF? And I basically have the facility there, and then I send them out to the various agencies for mental here, health here. We keep them in that home, or whether it be 20 people. And I'm asking that because we, in the past, have dealt with a treatment facility that wanted to come into Old Randolph Inn, and the entire neighborhood got up in arms and said, no, we don't want that here. But at the same time, I'm kind of wondering if ALF could basically do that same thing under the hospital rules.
I think there is a residential treatment facility use that's permitted in one of the R2 or R3 zoning districts. And it has a separate set of conditions and standards that you have to abide by in order to allow that particular use. And that's defined differently from an ALF.
But under an ALF, what I'm looking at is it could be, basically a transition home. Could you have a transition home under ALF?
My understanding from what how the Agency for Healthcare Administration permits these are considered to be permanent residents there. It's not considered to be a transient home. That would be a different type of license.
So I'm just bringing that up because it came to my mind. Maybe I'm way off base. Maybe, I don't know. But I know that I don't want to introduce issues. And quite honestly, it's not like I have an issue with treatment centers. I really don't. I look at them as a medical setting. But at the same time, you have to be cognizant of the residents that you place in these. The same goes for this. But I must mention that I see this on a reoccurring pattern that we establish basically guidelines and it's agreed upon guidelines, and we come back, whether it be 6 months later, and then we kind of remove those stipulations, and this was one of them. There was debate among the board about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Some of us believe that, and I am a firm believer of that items like this of large homes, ALFs, should be more of an hospital medical use. I would like to see that, but I can understand where smaller homes can accommodate this. I mean, it's not like I'm closed-minded to that.
Mr. Chairman, I think if I may, I think what you're referring to is community residential homes.
Yes.
For example, a single-family home in a subdivision with an ALF, being used as an ALF.
Right.
That's a little different. The state statute allows those, it actually trumps zoning. So you can utilize a single-family home in a residential subdivision for an ALF up to 6 residents.
Okay.
And they're considered to be a family unit according to state statute. So the only thing that the city or any local jurisdiction can do to impose any restrictions on there is really just say that there isn't another one located within 1,000 feet of it.
So when we're talking about 1.5 acres and we remove density, in reality, what is the bed count that we're looking at then?
Well, let me just clarify, what you were talking about, that single-family home, that can happen in any single-family residential zoning district. What we're talking about here is just allowing primarily large-scale type ALFs in multifamily and other special type zoning districts.
Right.
Now, what we're suggesting here is that we don't have a 1-for-1 or 2-for-1 density calculation in here. It's very difficult to determine rationally what does 2 beds mean 1 residential unit or 3 beds mean residential unit. It's difficult to do that.
Here's what I see happening, though. I see this being treated like a hospital medical, where we're removing the cap off of the lid off of this, and we're saying, fine, we're going to have a 50 patient on a smaller lot. And that is that would basically be permitted.
I can address that too. If you look further past, starting on page 14 of your packet, you'll see the standards that we currently have in the code for an ALF. And all these conditions were carried over from the old code. So these have not changed.
Right.
So basically, say, for example, as proposed, if you have a 1-acre lot and you want to put an ALF in one of these zoning districts, including the SMU zoning district, you got to meet all these conditions in here. And if you look at them, some of them say, well, if you have this number of beds, you have to have this amount of open space and common area space. And it provides a calculation for that.
Right.
So that can eat up a significant amount of your property in order to meet that.
But
And
at
so
the same time, that 450 can go down to 150, or is it 100? Maybe reduced. It can go down to 150, I believe, if I recall right, under the rules.
Yeah, there's some flexibility. There's a minimum that you can go to, but in addition to that, there's parking
150.
requirements, stormwater requirements. So
Right.
it could limit the number of beds that you could really put on a small lot.
So I'm not asking these questions to try to kill this or anything. I'm really honestly and sincerely asking these because when I'm looking at SMU, and in the past what we've discussed on this, and nor do I want to keep everybody here late, but SMU in the past from planners, I've heard is an old type of zoning. And then basically what we're going to be doing with this type of zoning district is getting rid of it and rezoning it to more modern, up-to-date. Not that I dislike SMU, because I do like it. I live in a perfect example of SMU use. But my understanding is that the city was migrating away from SMU.
If you're asking for our professional opinion, I'd probably have to concur that there's definitely some improvement that could be made to this zoning district. Just so you know, we are currently going through a process of selecting a consultant to help us out with the updating our comprehensive plan and our future land use element and our future land use categories. And I think through that process, we'll be evaluating these zoning districts at that time too. So I think we could certainly appreciate any input you have on how to improve that particular zoning district and any others.
My take is that and I say this and I sincerely mean it, I'm one vote, but I'm not comfortable with opening up more districts to ALFs. I got to consider residents there. I look at the use that we currently have in SMU, and it's not a huge potential there that they can really do anything. So there would only be a handful of targeted properties that you could do that with. And it could be a safeguard. I don't know. I don't know the property or who approached you, but I do know that there is one property that they would never ever want to rezone it. But I won't go there. Vice Chairman Shavir.
I want to get back to density, okay? I'm looking here, permitted principal uses in shoreline mixed use. And what happens if if you have an assisted living facility there that goes to 5 stories and you have the increased density? How does this work?
Because in shoreline mixed use, I'm looking here, and it says, hotels, motels, and medical and dental offices and clinics. So explain to me how this, if an ALF comes in and they want to make it 5 stories, and I realize there are other ancillary things that they'd have to have parking and so on and so forth, but how does that enter the picture, especially when you have residential involved in that? We're opening up the door. In other words, we're really changing something here by putting this ALF in the shoreline mixed use. So, how does that fit into this picture?
Basically, you'd be allowing a brand new use inside the zoning district among all the other permitted uses and conditional uses that are currently allowed in the shoreline mixed-use zoning district.
So the height of this ALF would become under the building height in shoreline mixed use, which is, I think, 5 stories?
I'd have to check. I'm trying to see if I can check the actual height standards inside the SMU. My understanding is that there is a maximum. I can't say for sure whether it's 5 stories specifically. I might actually have an actual feet. But yeah, anything inside the SMU would have to abide by whatever standards for height requirements inside that particular zoning district, including this.
Okay. Now, you gave us this color.
Yes.
Okay, where is this property? Where is this proposal?
Is your microphone on? Is your microphone on?
Sorry. Where is this site on this map?
I do not know, sir. The citizen has asked us for the ability to ask City Council to consider allowing an ALF inside this particular zoning district. So the City Council gave us direction to come up with an ordinance, and when we do this, we consider the potential impact to all properties that could be considered zoned SMU. So we don't look at it as one particular property, so we're not tailoring this to a particular piece of property or any development. So we're looking at this as how would this change impact all properties that have that particular zoning district. And as you saw on the map here, on the first one, it says SMU zoning with a bubble on it. Those are all the properties along the shore right now that currently have this zoning district. So you can see it's a pretty long length of US 1 from Riverside Drive, the north part, to River Edge Drive in the south part of the city.
Okay, so why are we not looking at this as a conditional use? In other words, we don't know what we're looking at. We don't know what the situation is. We really don't know where the property is. We don't know what the neighbors think about this, and we don't know what the impact is. We don't know. You just want us to change the zoning to allow it. So my point is, I don't know. I'm trying to square this thought process of putting an ALF in shoreline mixed use, because it could be appropriate, but then again, maybe not, depending on where it's at and the impact it's going to have on the surrounding properties. And so that's a little bit of a difficulty. Just trying to just say, okay, let's go ahead and do this. I don't know.
It's a policy decision of you making a recommendation to City Council as to whether it is a good policy to allow an assisted living facility in this zoning district. That's really the crux of this request. And what we tried to provide to you was an area, a map that showed the location of where this zoning district is. So you can see it's along the shore, all along the east side of US 1. I can't say what the impact would be. And I could say that if they don't meet the conditions that are in the ordinance, it would not be permitted.
Okay. And, there are other factors to consider here, an assisted living facility. First of all, we have an assisted facility not too far from my home on Knox McRae. And truthfully, we hear sirens sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes daytime. It just depends. You don't know. There's no set schedule or timing when this happens. So I just don't know if this is a type of thing that would fit in with the surrounding neighborhood, whether, there are some condominiums and high-rises there along US 1. And without knowing more about, what's planned, I mean, what the density, what the height might be, and, giving this some other consideration, I just have a question about. Anyway, that's my thought.
Secretary Chambers.
I got a question. Being is the confusing part of this, that we don't know what they're talking about, what area. How come we can't just leave it like that and take it on a case-by-case basis? They came out with a certain area and want to put a assisted living in there, then they could bring it to you guys and say, we want to put it over here. And you can, at that point, we can look at it and say, no, you can't put it there, or yeah, you can, depending on what it is and how big it is and what the area is, around it will hold up on. Why just not make it some kind of a flat outright saying, oh, well, you can put it anywhere along this line up here. Just leave it alone, and then when they come to you with whatever plan they have, wherever they decide they want to try to put it, I say put it, but try to put it, and at that point we can say yes or no. You can't put it there.
The citizen request stemmed from an individual that currently owns property that has the SMU zoning, which created the need for this request to allow this use that's not currently permitted. It's currently not allowed because the code does not allow for an ALF in the property that he owns. In order to proceed with engineering and planning for the development of this future project, this change would be required for the owner as is, or a rezoning would be necessary. I don't know if that's allowable.
That's correct. The zoning district would have to allow this use in order for us to even consider the application for an ALF. And so that would have to be permitted there. Otherwise, the applicant could ask to rezone the property to a district that currently allows an ALF. And so we would, but the problem with that is we would have to review the request for rezoning the property based on the merits of what that zoning district would allow, not that specific project.
But what we've seen in the past is you have two items coming before us, before council. One is rezoning, one is conditional use, and they go hand in hand. So we've seen that time and time again, that they have that option to rezone, and then the second motion or second item at that exact time is for the conditional use permit for something.
That's correct, but if you recall, when you look at our rezoning applications, our rezoning reports, we may state what the applicant intends to do with the property, but we're not technically supposed to reviewing a plan in order to develop on that property. So in other words, you can't deny a request to rezone a property to another zoning district because you don't like the project that they're proposing. You can only deny or really deny it, or look at it as far as whether it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and whether it is a good policy to place that particular zoning and district and all its permitted uses on that particular property.
I'm just saying, I've seen that over and over and over again where the city staff does that. And so it's like on the second part, or in the first item, it's like, okay, we're going to make the assumption that this is going to go through and we're going to review it as it's been approved. And then the second is contingent on the first.
If that's the case, then it's probably incumbent on the staff to better clarify the intent of each of those applications.
I'm just saying that that's what I've seen time and time again. And I mean, those of you, I think everybody's been on the board here long enough to see those that over and over again. But I didn't want to. Did you have more questions?
And you got I see confusion there. And I see an area marked off on here, this whole area along Riverhead Drive, all the way up through there is that one color where we'd have to change that to allow assisted living anywhere along here.
Right.
And I'm just saying that there are probably areas along there that they would vehemently would not want that kind of facility near their homes along there. So that's why I said we need to take it on a case-by-case basis, depending on where this property is. And
I think that is the intent of the conditional use permit for properties that are greater than 1.5 acres. However, this would be a change that would allow any SMU property to have this as an option for their use of that property.
Right.
It can't be treated case by case here because this is a change for the use in this zoning category and not just one specific parcel.
in other words, you're saying that they can put an assisted living facility anywhere where this pink area is, if they want to,
Basically where the blue area is.
or blue.
This one here
Yeah.
is a better show of
this one?
SMU.
Excuse me, the colored map is the future land use map. I didn't have time to put in the table so you could see what each color represents. But if you see on the colored map, which is the future land use map,
This one?
yes, sir, the pink area that's along the shore corresponds with the other map. So there is a future land use called shoreline mixed use on top of the properties that's currently zoned shoreline mixed use. So you look on the other map and you just see that one blue color.
Right.
That's that zoning district.
Yeah.
That's correct.
I wanted to bring up something real quick too, is that when we're looking at the maps and we're talking about submerged lands, I'm looking at SMU and I'm seeing a lot of properties that appear to have submerged lands, like at least 10 of them.
It would appear so, yes.
Okay. Vice Chairman Shavir.
Yeah, the other thing that occurs to me here is the impact, the economic impact of an ALF. We're trying to, downtown, bring in business and have businesses along the US 1 corridor. And this is an optimal place for our city to have commercial businesses. And quite frankly, I don't know if an ALF really would fit in to that criteria of a commercial district. And so I have a question, thoughts about that. And I know I just don't think that it should be a priority to put an ALF in this particular area. But that's just my personal feeling.
Okay. Member Baker?
Well, I'm glad you brought up several of the points that have been brought up. I have had very favorable experiences with ALF. However, and I guess my take on it is probably a little different than most for that reason. But especially when we were talking about the submerged lands, that is a major issue, I think, and also realizing that 1.5 acre being the cutoff and just multi-storied facilities also on the river. When that was, I also have some safety concerns with having people along the river with walkers and things like that. I'm getting older all the time, and I would love to have a nice place if I had to be in a facility, where maybe I could see the river, but, you end up fencing it so they don't fall in. A lot of places with ALFs won't have swimming pools because even though it does the residents a lot of good, there are so many issues with drowning. I think there's an awful lot here that still needs to be. I think we need to look this CAF over again before we go on with it, basically.
Vice Chairman Shavir.
And along with that, and this occurred to me, and I didn't bring it up, but having an ALF there, I don't know exactly what type of structure this would be, but also you would have to consider hurricane evacuation. This is right on the river, right up front on the water. And I just don't think that that's such a great thing when you have people that can't drive on their own and take care of themselves and have to evacuate. And we don't know the density in terms of height of this building. And consequently,
I can answer that. I finally found the section to answer your earlier question about height. So the Shoreline Mixed Use Zoning District allows a maximum height of 50 feet with conditions, with caveats rather. So an additional 1 foot side yard setback shall be required for each foot of building height above 35 feet, with a maximum up to 50 feet. For properties with structures located adjacent to a local street or River Edge Drive, the maximum building height along the street shall not exceed 35 feet at the setback lines. 1.5 feet of additional setback shall be required for each foot of building height over 35 feet. This is what the SMU says.
But that's only because of the roads. The roads are not arterial there on River Edge, and that's what stipulates that to be 35, and SMU's 50. But at the same time, I mean, I'm looking at, by taking off the density calculations, what you're doing essentially is saying, all right, whatever I can put on this footprint of land, I can maximize it at 50 if the setbacks allow. Now, at the same time, I can come in, and what we've been seeing recently is the variances have been, well, they've been given. And I'm not saying that's a given, it's just that I'm looking at this as like I would a tourist. If I was to put a hotel right smack dab on the river, essentially, if I could put a hotel there, I could put an ALF here. If I had tourist zoning, and then my density, I'll work it from there, because then I need 150 foot per room and stuff like that. So I just look at it like we're opening up the floodgates by doing this. I thought in the past what we tried to do is we tried to hold back the tide on ALFs and say, look, here is we opening them up to R2 and R3, and now we're even opening them up even further, plus we're removing the density caps. I feel like it's just too much. Not that, and I make it the point, it's not that I don't like ALFs. I got to consider the people in them residential areas. I got to consider the potential build later on, since it is riverfront. Once you put something there, and I've said this over and over again, you're looking for something to be there for 20 to 50 years, and you're not going to maximize your build out on that. So anyway, that is all I'm going to say, because I don't want to go on and on about this. I think
If I may, just to respond to your comments. So the density, remember the density cap that we had in here, or the language in here, was not in existence before this new code. It did not exist in the prior code. And then your statement about variances, these conditions and standards you see here in order to allow an ALF are part of the use. So varying any of this would not be allowed, would not go before the Board of Adjustment. If you can't meet these conditions, you just can't have the use isn't permitted. So it would be, in other words, it would be considered a use variance, which is not something that the Board of Adjustment can approve.
okay.
Isn't there a height restriction on the east side of US 1 to 35 feet already?
No, sir, it depends on the zoning district. Each zoning district has its own maximum height.
I thought I had some paperwork
Right.
that says 35 feet on the east side.
Now, what you can do is, like in SMU, you can go up to 100, but you're saying that under this condition, under this, you can't. You're stuck at 50, and they can't request to go up to 100?
No, they can't do 100 in the SMU. Apparently, that used to be something that you could do prior,
No.
but for some reason, a few years ago, that was taken out of the code. And so your maximum height right now in the SMU is 50 feet.
Okay.
So there isn't a 35-foot height restriction.
On the entire east side of US 1, is that what
Yeah.
you're asking? No, it looks like every zoning district has its own standard.
You ought to know, but I'm sure I got paperwork at home that says it was restricted to 35 on this side and 50 on the west side.
Well, you're talking about the US 1 corridor study.
Yeah.
That was, I thought, preferred. So,
There may have been a recommendation inside that study.
what was
That-
that?
We've got buildings that are tall, Somerset, condominiums.
And what he's referring to is that was, I mean, I remember they used to all come up here, and they would, all those buildings came up and got the 100-foot and more, so I do recall. But I was unaware that we took that out of the code to prevent that from happening anymore. So,
I could find out the date when that happened or which ordinance, if you like, and bring that back to you. Or
I
provide it to
mean,
you.
yeah, I'm sure you're right. Positive you're right. This is what you do. Dr. Payson.
I too was impressed that along the shorelines that it was restricted to 35. And as you move back, as you pointed out
Yeah,
earlier,
well, I remember too.
the height could increase based on the formula that was set. And at what point did we change that?
I'm not sure. I think it was several years ago, there was an ordinance that was adopted that removed that
Well,
100
we did the
feet.
US 1 corridor study, and we did say we wanted shorter on the river, and then they go up on the west side.
On the west side, yeah.
Taller on the west side, shorter on the east side.
Along the river.
But that was
I
from
know
the US 1 corridor
There was
study.
a lot of concern once those condominiums went up over near the pool property, as I can recall.
And there's only 2 more properties really left that still have the ability that have been, I wouldn't say grandfathered in, but they have development agreements that are going to allow them to build higher. One of them is the old Howard Johnson's property, and then which is owned by the Kotskis family, and the other one was owned by, I don't know if he still owns it, Danny Treader, and that was for 100-story, 100-foot. I bet he wish it was 100-story, but 100-foot. But I don't know the status on that one. But that probably had the same. There's 30 years that they have on that.
Well, the first one you mentioned was approved through a development agreement, and the second one, Mr. Treader's, was approved through a conditional use permit based on the 100-foot maximum that used to be allowed inside the zoning district.
So you're saying that they can't develop that now to 100?
No.
Okay. Okay, so there's one property. But that was, I don't know if that was, I know that they were going to do a tier because of River Edge, or was it River Drive, River Edge Drive, or Riverside Drive? Yeah, and part of that was because of the technicality of it. Part of it is on US 1, most of it is on the Riverside Drive.
Didn't we have the airport involved in all this, and they said they didn't want anything over?
No, not there, not there.
Huh?
All right, so we've beat this around quite a bit. So, another question? Member Baker.
I have a question comment, I guess, on page 15, under, what is this? You see where it says note, and then it says 1, 2, 3, and then there's the little letter I. Next to that, it says a detailed floor plan and site plan identifying allow rooms / areas.
What do you read?
Page 15?
I don't understand
Yeah, right
what
in the middle.
an allow room is.
It may be a typo. It should be allowed, or rooms that are allowed.
Okay,
I'd have to check that, but it looks like a typo.
okay.
But basically, that's stating that you would have to provide a floor plan with your conditional use permit. And so it requires a lot of detail at this stage prior to actually going through site plan review. And the reason why we ask for that floor plan is because that's the best way for us to determine whether you're meeting the open space and common area requirements in this section, by finding out how many rooms you have and how many beds you have, and the square feet of each of those rooms.
Okay. So with that, is there a motion on this item? Don't jump all at once. Vice Chairman?
I would like to, this is just a recommendation, is that correct? Or are we actually taking a vote on how we want to do
This
this?
is a recommended action for the ordinance that's presented for you tonight.
We only
It's LDR, so, yeah, all of it's just recommendation, but they do take your
We will
input.
need a recommendation to move forward to City Council. The first hearing with City Councils on Tuesday, May 23rd, and the final public hearing with City Councils on June, is it 9th or 13th? The first meeting in June.
Well, I'm going to make a recommendation that we not have an ALF in the shoreline mixed use. And the reasons that I'm stating is that, first of all, you have storms and evacuation, and I don't think it's going to be compatible with the business district. We're trying to increase business along the corridor there. And I just don't know at this point the height and density of the impact that it's going to be. So that's my reason for
Is
it.
it a motion to deny?
That's correct.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we take a vote on this, please?
Member Baker?
So yes would be denying,
Yes.
yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Secretary Chambers?
Denied, yes.
Dr. Faison?
no.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. All right. Motion passes 5-1. And for the boards, the city councils, let's be appropriate for him to, usually it's the other way around. Why would it be appropriate to ask him his reasons for passage? I mean, usually it's when we say,
I think what he did is appropriate, providing the basis for the denial of the
Right.
ordinance as presented.
and normally we do it the other way around, and I don't see that happen, so. Okay. All right, so if we'll move on to the next item, please.
So the next item before you tonight is an ordinance extending prior ordinance that approved in a moratorium on medical marijuana dispensaries or issuing any permits or licenses to allow medical marijuana dispensaries. On November 2016, the Florida voters approved a constitutional amendment to allowing medical marijuana use within the state. But on January 10, 2017, Council adopted Ordinance 1-2017 to establish a temporary moratorium, and the staff is asking for an extension of that moratorium in order to provide time to review legislative action related to the amendment and to finalize a proposed ordinance relating to medical marijuana. And just so you know, there was no action by the legislature, as some of you are probably aware of from the news, on this. So it is up to, I guess, a state agency, I guess Department of Health, to come up with some kind of standards for licensing medical marijuana dispensaries. So we have been staff has been diligently working on a draft ordinance. We'll present that to you. But we asked that we have some more time to review this because there were so many things going on in the state right now that are just out of our control. So we're kind of hoping to see where the chips lie to figure out what kind of ordinance we should come up with.
Vice Chairman?
Is there any time frame that you're looking for in terms of extending the moratorium?
This ordinance would be an extension of 180 days. So it looks like, I think on the end of, on page 19 of your packet, it would expire on January 5th, 2018.
Is that, I'm looking for it. Is that here? I don't,
19 of your packet, I think it looks like it's the last page, which is the second page of the ordinance.
hold on.
In the very top, section 2, moratorium extension. And it says at the end of the paragraph, It'll be extended 180 days to
Oh,
January 5th.
I see it. Okay. I see it now. Thank you.
However, once the staff has prepared an ordinance that's ready to go before council, this moratorium would probably be repealed at that same meeting.
Is that time frame adequate for you?
Yes. Yes, we believe so.
Doesn't the legislature have to act within the next 6 months?
Well, several jurisdictions have come up with ordinances already. We've kind of tailored a draft right now based on several others that are nearby. And it looks like the Department of Health has to come up with something by the end of this year. So I think we have adequate time. January 5th is adequate time for us to come up with something based on what they do.
Dr. Faison?
Yes, while we holding back, why do we need another 180 days when in the news today, Orlando is going ahead with theirs, and we in Titusville has to have another 180 days to make a decision.
I think that one of the reasons that city has held back is because we were waiting to see what the legislature has done, and also with the relatively young council, we wanted to allow them time to see what's happening in the legislature as well as with the city. Our plan moving forward is to get the feedback from council on a few variables on the draft ordinance that they would find acceptable for our city. But I believe that largely we have the framework. We just wanted to see if there was any final details that came out before the end of session, which didn't happen, and that's why we went forward with the plan with the extension.
Now, we are denying those who may need this medical marijuana
No state licenses
an
have been
opportunity to purchase.
no state licenses have been issued that we would require in order to move forward with a city's development permit. And so the city's requiring that a state license be obtained prior to submitting an application for the city.
In Orlando, it may be, I know some jurisdictions have permitted dispensaries based on an old or a prior law. I'm going to assume I think it's called the Charlotte's Web law or something like Charlotte's.
I haven't reviewed Orlando's ordinance.
But I know Clearwater did the same thing. They approved one under a prior statute, or that may be still in existence. But what this referendum did last year was made it a lot more broad, a lot more open. So the state legislature was supposed to come up with something to kind of help guide that and come up with some policies on that, and they never did. And so we have not received any specific requests for dispensaries. But my understanding is that if the legislature didn't come up with anything, and since they didn't, now it's up to the Department of Health to address the referendum that was approved, or Amendment 2, then until that time, we are under no obligation to approve a license if one is requested to the city. This is obviously a policy decision. If the city wants to go forward with not coming up with the criteria right now and allowing and considering it on a case-by-case basis, we certainly could do that without any particular criteria. But that's the policy of the city. I think what the city council wanted to do was they want to hear from the staff, what are the options, what is everybody else doing, and what would you suggest? What would the staff suggest? So that's why they asked to adopt this moratorium. And because of that and the situation going on with the legislature and waiting on the Department of Health, we would like more time to review the issue before coming up with specific standards at the request of the council.
We have a reputation of being a day late and a dollar short in the city of Titusville. And that with developments, inviting companies to come into the city. And that's the kind of reputation we have as a municipality. I'd like to see us get away from that. And that's where we are, 180 days. I have those out there who I've talked with would like to see us go ahead and get something done in light of this situation with the medical marijuana. Another 180 days, another 6 months.
Giving them some more to bite on. That's ridiculous.
Okay. Vice Chairman Shavir, do you have anything else to to that?
Yeah, I personally would disagree with Dr. Faison. I think we need more guidance from the state. I would hate to see a business come in and find himself behind the eight ball losing money because the state has not finalized the requirements for this type of business. And in terms of if somebody really needs the medical marijuana at the present time, I believe that there are ways to get it. It may not be easily gotten, but I do think that there are ways that it can be done. So I would make a recommendation that we go for this moratorium extension as written by staff.
I
Well-
am speaking to those who couldn't afford what you have suggested.
All right, let's do this real quick. Open it to the public and close it to the public. So I want to make some comments. I've told the board many times I love to snow ski. And Mike's, I love to snow ski. Love snow skiing. My experiences when I go to Colorado, I was just like, I got to admit, I thought it was pretty hilarious to see what, coming from being on this board and then going to Colorado, and I see this huge church, and then right in front of it, I see this dispensary. And I'm like, wow, that would never happen in Titusville. Never, ever, ever. At least I don't think so. Depends on how you write the ordinance. But, a lot of things that I do hear is that I hear pros and cons about Colorado. I do. I hear that some people say, that it's making so much money. It's doing really. This is the wave of the future, and we know this. Okay, but at the same time, there's some lessons learned, and that would definitely be one of them. We can't have dispensaries all over Titusville. We know that we need to limit it. We also know that it's still against federal law, so you have to keep in mind there's other things to consider. You not only need to you need to protect those people running those dispensaries. So I hope that when you draft this, you make some considerations. I'm not saying narrow it down to where we can't put a dispensary in Titusville. Obviously, I'm not. It's not like I'm absolutely opposed to them, but I think we need to make it very specific so that there's protection for the citizens, there's protections for the businesses that are by these businesses, protections for that business as well, where maybe we should look at some security requirements and positioning, just as we do with bars, So I don't think we should outright ban them. I think this is the wave. This is what's happening. It's going to happen whether you agree with it or not. It's nothing that it's for me, but I don't know. Maybe years later I'll be like, this might be an alternative. But my point is that I hope that we take some of the lessons from some of the states that have previously passed and consider the crime, the traffic, and the nuisances that come with these businesses. So that's really about all I had to add. On the other hand, I know that we did look at an ordinance a long time ago. I know that there's been enough time, but at the same time, I guess if they don't have a license from the state and the state isn't issuing licenses, let's be realistic. It's not like we have to jump to make this happen because they need to be state authorized first. So we can pass an ordinance way quicker than the state can pass rules. So, anything else? All right, is there a motion on this?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to extend the moratorium on medical marijuana dispensaries.
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, can we have a vote on this?
Dr. Faison?
No.
Secretary Chambers?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Shavir?
Yes.
Member Baker?
Yes.
Member Ritchie?
Yes.
Chairman Williams?
Yes. Okay,
And I think I stated my reason earlier, so that's what you need.
I understand. Believe me, I remember the last time. I'm like flip-flopped on this because, I thought we should have been ahead of the curve, but I'm looking at it now. It's like, well, they can't get permits anyway.
Exactly.
So, but I definitely understand your position. All right, so that was the last item. So we will go to reports.
Staff does not have anything to report this
Okay,
time.
City Attorney.
I have no report either.
Okay, School Board.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Sarah. Dr. Faison, we'll just go down the list.
I say again, we got a reputation of being a day late and a dollar short. That's the reputation that we have in the city of Titusville. I don't know whether that's good, bad, indifferent, but that is it. And what about the 300 jobs that we have mentioned recently? The 300 jobs mentioned recently.
Which ones?
I forget now which company is one of the space companies
Well,
that's coming to Brevard County.
Like I can tell you, Lockheed Martin, that's already starting. I mean, not like I can speak for them, but with Lockheed, we're currently, not we, it's a different division than me. They are closing down Sunnyvale, and they're offering people from California to move here. Obviously, people from California don't like Florida, is what I'm hearing, but so it's creating jobs here. It's creating jobs for our Floridians. That's one of them. The other one was Blue Origin. Have they broken ground yet out there for that?
Oh, yeah, I went out there and looked at that factory all up. It's huge, long way, stretch for about,
What was-
half a mile.
Well, they going to South and Central Brevard?
I mean, that is possible. That is, they are. That is Merritt Island and Cocoa and right. That's basically that. And Orlando. I can tell you the Space Center is full of people from all over but Titusville. But
I don't know what it is. Like
I don't know.
said-
It's been several years since I worked out there, but that's back in
Like
the
I
day.
said, we seem to be the people who are a day late.
And what about the factory for
Dollar
seats,
Shop.
Embraer?
Embryo, yeah.
Yeah, Embraer. How is that
Do we
proceeding?
have
Do you know?
adequate housing for those who could be?
Well, I know we have the
recruited?
potential for 1,000 homes over by Grissom,
Yep.
as well as
Creek.
we have the new developments, as well as I passed by the developments over off of Knox McCrae. All those.
Now, Knox and McCree, is that assisted, government assisted?
I don't know.
That's apartment.
It's apartments,
No,
but
I know the apartments, but apartments
no idea.
are assisted also and with certain stipulations
Section 8.
as to population who can be helped.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who meet certain social economic arrangements.
I defer to the city.
Just looking at the city of Titusville, you mentioned Grissom,
Yep.
and that is, that's had developed some time ago when it was initiated. It would have been Grand Farm, but we don't have housing.
No, I agree. I
nowadays.
think we have the potential, but I think the market has to get there first. I do know that. Well, okay, I shouldn't say this on camera, but generally, when you are told you're going to get so many jobs, it's the possibility, and the reality is, not quite there, and the time frame isn't there either. So. But I do see growth in the Space Center. I do see that coming. I think I hear that the market is getting much better. I also hear when you put your home on the market here in Titusville, it's selling fairly quickly.
2 days, full price.
So, that is a big indicator on real estate sales of how well things are going, I think. But
we got to have the type of housing to accommodate.
I think we need to grow.
Are we still on television?
Okay. Is that it?
That's it for me.
Okay. Vice Chairman Shavir,
No report.
Secretary Chambers,
Nothing.
Member Baker, Member Ritchie.
Question, I understand some of the businesses have pulled out of the Titus Landings. Is that correct?
Question again, I'm sorry.
Some of the businesses that were supposed to go into Titus Landings are no longer going to be going in there.
I can't answer that. I'm not sure. I guess my understanding is they weren't able to secure who they hoped.
Who as they hoped?
I'd have to get back with you on that. So I'll have to speak to the right person to find out the details on that, and I can provide that information to you.
I also heard that there's supposed to be an Olive Garden going on the other side of 95. I don't know where that came from, but
I have not heard that.
I've heard that rumor for
10 years.
10 years. Every year somebody starts that rumor.
Yeah, every year.
And every year I hear the same rumor. The city won't let them come in, so that's not true.
To follow up on what you just stated, the parish medical building, there has been adjustment to the sign. What's going on with that?
The parish medical building
not there anymore.
in Titus Landing?
Right, Mayo Clinic. Yeah, it was a parish, Mayo Clinic.
Uh-huh.
What's going on with that?
I'm gonna have to get you a buzzer.
Your question is whether...
My question is, the parish building at the southwest corner.
Sure.
At one time, there was parish, and then we had the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic is no longer there. I don't know if there's been any relationship lost, but
I can find out what I can and provide that information to you as well. I'm not familiar with any circumstance on that.
okay.
Anything that happened.
And the big building on the north west corner of the property, is that the theater?
Yes.
Going up.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Okay, and is that good?
Any news on the conference center, the hotel conference? Any news on the hotel conference center on 405 and US 1?
No, I'm not familiar with that either, so I'll have to get back with you on that information if there's anything.
Right, and then I have just one question about the old Ibis, the old Taco Bell building that is, it's supposed to be left up there from a memorial eyesore for Titusville, the city residents of Titusville, is my understanding from what I read in the paper. So I know I'm being sarcastic about that, but if that being the case, what is the city's position on how they're going to handle it, and how long will the building that's been...
I can't speak to the status of the site plan or building permit that may have been initiated by the owner of the old Taco Bell site. However, I would comment that code enforcement has cited the property across the street, 1795 South Washington, for code violations on site, and code enforcement has the ability to go out there and cite properties like the one across the street. However, when there's an active building permit or plans in place, that would typically stall or delay code enforcement activity at that site when the owner of the property is working with the city to develop or redevelop as a site.
So when you say I'm lost, when you lost me when you said across the street, are you talking about that property, or are you talking about the property across the street from the property I was asking about?
The property that you're asking about is Taco Bell, and across the street from it, facing the river, is 1795 South Washington. That is a site.
No. Okay. When I said Taco Bell years ago, I think it was a car dealership. It was a Taco Bell or something. That's what I'm referring to.
Like the one,
yeah.
wall standing.
Yeah, less than 50%.
That's
Okay.
the property I'm talking about across the street from.
Okay.
So they're adjacent to each other with River Edge Drive in between
Yes.
them.
Yes. So they have been cited by code enforcement, and what would be the timeline?
I believe it was 20 days.
to comply.
Yes.
And has the 20 days.
The 20 days started, I think it was on Thursday or one day
Okay.
last week, and then from there, 20 days is from the original notice of violation. Then the code enforcement will continue to monitor and inspect before
Right.
issuing a complaint, which would be the next step before bringing it before the code
I
board.
just, I'm just bringing this up, and I was very excited for the restaurant to come. I am, but I think the code is very clear. I mean, it can't be more clear than what it was for that on that 50%. And for redevelopment, you can tear down 50% and then build, and they tore down more, and then the city said, "Whoa, you've done too much. Now we got to go to the new codes." And yes, that's a whole different. That's basically the same. But anyway, I just, it's not like it wasn't an eyesore before. I just wanted to know if anything's being done. Hopefully the owner has been, I'm sure that he would love to build a restaurant, and this is just going to cost more and more money, but.
We've been working, the Community Development Department has been working with the property owner on that issue for several months. I can't say this, there is a site plan that was submitted and reviewed, and comments were provided to the applicant, and we have not received a formal response to that for us to review again for a couple of months now, at least. And then there was a permit that was initially submitted to put a new building there, to replace the old one. And that's kind of what triggered the requirement for a site plan because of the non-conforming issues on that property.
Right.
So we just have two applications, or really the site plan is what really holding this property up. Staff has done everything that we could possibly do to work with the applicant, and the onus is on the applicant right now to follow through with that response to our comments on that site plan.
So hopefully they will work with the city, and the city work with them. And as my understanding is, they're a long-standing business person of Titusville. And, okay.
How about the old hotel where the old El Lancito used to be? That was they were working on that, and all of a sudden the equipment's not there anymore.
I will have to get back to you and answer on that one as well. I'll have to check with the building official.
Where is this located again?
Randolph Inn.
Randolph Inn. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then we had another from Vice Chairman Shabir.
Since we're going around looking at these properties, can you give me an update on Royal Oak?
The golf course ordinance, is that or the ordinance that was?
Well, just the
or
status,
just the
status right now of Royal Oak.
of the golf course.
As it sits right now, is anything going on?
Do you have anything on that?
I don't have any current information to report. I'd have to look into it and get back to you.
Yeah, my recollection right now is, or last heard about it, is that there's still brothers or owners are still working out litigation, I guess, and it's still an issue. It's still up in the air.
Okay, I was just curious because we've discussed the legal ramifications with the bank and the ownership, and it evidently there's a lot going on there. So perhaps it's not an emergency. Perhaps you can bring us up to date, though, if anything has changed on it. Just keep us informed.
Okay. Is anything else? So we're adjourned.